not crazy long.
Only because it's been way longer at points.
It doesn't look neglected because it usually is neglected.
The beer density is pretty high. Father son haircut tomorrow.
Oh yeah,
And I also need to replace some copper pipes. So
copper pipe.
it's a big day.
The console can go be out.
No cons, I'd say.
Just can go.
I need to chase it as far as I don't know where it's leaking.
Will you just go straight can go onto concrete?
Fuck yeah.
No drilling, pilot holes. No,
What?
straight in.
Is there someone inspected?
No diamond bit on a grinder just to.
Pilot holes for chasing copper pipe. Are you mad? How much time do you think you have to do this?
Well, then you'd have to pour less concrete to fill it in after.
The fact that I'm pouring concrete at all is defeating the point. It doesn't even matter. Once the concrete has been poured, it's all in.
It's all in.
Hopefully it's just this much of concrete. Hopefully it's
I'd say
2
you
foot.
could triple that.
No, I hope it's just leaking near it.
It's surely just leaking at the joint.
That's what I'm hoping.
There's no reason it would have split.
Come on. What's the story?
Come on. Is that the good one?
Yeah, fuck you. Yeah, that's the good one. Very straight there last week.
I feel like it was very straight when we were in Portugal.
It was, yeah. It's definitely getting a lot better. It's just slow going.
Lads, for everyone watching, it would be great if you could just like the stream. Be very beneficial. Look at this. Oh, yeah. It's an overhead position right there. And a wrist that is incapable of holding a barbell.
That forearm mass. Jesus Christ. Look at that. What the fuck?
On today's live stream.
No wonder people can't break the grip. Oh my God. That mass in that forearm.
Right on. When you're quite ready. Kaiser says hello. Max says hello. I wonder, is that Max from the S&C camp? Hello, Max. If it is that Max. Bring me my fix says, hello, lads. My hamstrings are effed from your RDL stroke hamstring Nordics combo this morning. Thanks. That's great to hear. There's nothing better than a few Nordic hamstring curls. I also really love Nordic hamstring curls when you just you're kind of figuring out what to do at the end of a session and you just know you need to pair your planks with something. You should immediately get that effect.
Yeah, mine is never Nordic hamstrings.
Isn't it?
No, my go-to would never be like, yeah, you know what I'd love to do now is some hamstring curls.
Do you think maybe that's why your hamstrings get a bit twingy?
Oh, probably. Probably.
AM says he doesn't feel like, or they don't feel like watching the Olympics that there's no Tian.
That's fair.
That is fair. I feel like weightlifting has missed out on a lot. They're kind of segregating or cutting themselves off from the mass populace.
Well, it's not up to weightlifting really as a problem, I suppose.
Balrog says, greetings, lads. Have a nice weekend. On my way to crush Sika pull week 4, day 2. Can feel the ass and back gains. Nice. That's absolutely great. To be honest, deadlift is my favorite thing to be pushing hard. I love it.
No.
I absolutely love deadlift.
I'm not sure if I've ever even pushed a deadlift.
I love it.
Nice.
It's the only thing I enjoyed about doing powerlifting.
Garf's right elbow is the equivalent of Dara's front squat. Dara's a great front squat.
What are you trying to say?
In fact, Dara's front squat is better than his back squat almost. Ratios.
Definitely the ratios are better.
Did you do 210?
No, 200.
Might have done 210.
May have done 210.
Hope you're well. Hello, Andrew. Yes, what's up? Will paused front squats improve my front squat meaningfully? No. So the issue with front squats is that it's very hard to move the front squat by itself. So obviously doing front squats will make your front squat somewhat better, but generally the back squat makes your front squat a lot better, and pause front squats are just a further regression from that. So the best way to reliably increase your front squat is keep front squatting and then increase your back squat. It is the most surefire way I can guarantee you PBs in your front squat. There's been times where I've barely done front squats. I've definitely done periods where I didn't do any front squats for maybe 6 or 7 weeks and just kept back squatting and reliably could ensure that my back squat or my front squat would be at a certain number once my back squat had gone up. Now, I don't really recommend that, but increasing your back squat is the best way to increase your front squat. Pause front squats, The problem with them is they're even lighter still than the front squats. We're not really going to see a big difference. Now, the caveat here is that if you're a amateur lifter or you're a very new lifter, you're a beginner stage lifter, then any kind of style of squatting is going to bring up your other lifts. But if you're anyway progressed or anyway well trained, it's not going to make a big difference.
I will say as well, most people just shouldn't be pause squatting. Use a pause squat for what it's meant to be used for.
Unless you want them.
Yeah. But in terms of getting better at squatting, the pause squat isn't the way to get there. Rory Kelly says, yes, lads, final week of block 2 in the weightlifting program. Increased my squat 1RM by 20 kilos and maxi out snatch and clean and jerk this week. Nice. You'll notice a massive difference in that snatch and clean and jerk feels, or hopefully will. Nothing like a bit of extra raw strength to get you there. Rory then says, did the first 2 blocks back to back. How long of a rest would you recommend before starting the third block? Probably around a week. Now it depends what your plans are, what your competition schedule, or when you want to hit certain numbers, what you have going on in your life. If you're about to go on holidays and you have 2 weeks before you go away, you're better off just taking a bit of time off. But generally speaking, about a week, 5 to 7 days is loads to take off in between. Especially with those, like, you're not going to be crazy fatigued or anything. After something like the RTA, where you push really, really hard for 8 or 12 weeks, then it is better to take some bit of a maintenance phase or a bit of a deload afterwards. But generally speaking, about 5 to 7 days is loads.
Raging just Raging just said he meant about the depth, not the weight. Your 200 is pretty good depth. I think you see sometimes
I actually just pulled up a picture of my 200.
Yeah, you see taller lifters will often get a bit deeper on the front squat than on the back squat.
My depth is better on the front squat, definitely, than on the back squat.
But like I said, it's just a pivot while patella is acting up and still do something to benefit my weightlifting.
Nice.
Marty says, hey guys, tightening up on heavy weights on the turnover in the snatch. How would you address it? Where would you implement in the snatch program? What do you mean by tightening up? Do you mean you want to keep it closer, or you feel like you're getting restricted? So I'm going to power ahead and assume that you want to get it closer. So tightening up on heavy weights on the turnover. So big thing, we have a lot of issue when people are turning the snatch over is misuse or lack of use of the traps. So for example, we were at our weightlifting camp last week in Portugal, and we were getting people to do pulls, and everyone had a major issue with moving their traps to any significant degree with weights that were 70-80% of their best snatch from the floor. So we're doing snatch pulls, and we were like, okay, we want to elevate your traps as much as possible. And for the first couple of sets, people were like this. They were like, no, I'm moving them as much as I can. But in reality, we need traps to be doing this in the turnovers, traps to ears, and then following through with that, then the elbows turn over high. So big issue is probably just you're not elevating the traps initially. Now, there could be issues further down along the chain. You could be looping in the second pull. You might be bringing the hips into the barbell too early, all of which could be there. But if we just focus on the third pull and ignore the prior issues which may or may not be present, which could be present and or be present, is we want to be focusing on traps first, then elbows come like this. So we go into that pull. As we extending, we're like this to turn the barbell over, begin its vertical path, and we're pulling like this. Look at that internal rotation.
Look at that.
That's all that soft tissue work. So we're ending up like this as we pull under, whereas a lot of times what happens is people do this as they're pulling under. So we're here, and we were literally getting everyone to heavy pulls, and everyone was like this, trying to pull. Eventually, by the end, we were getting people up here with those pulls. So traps, very useful, especially in the snatch. In the clean also, but we're talking about the snatch here.
I think as well, just having bigger, stronger upper back really helps with that. So if you've never done a lot of upper back bodybuilding, it can be hard to get that kind of height at the top. Up next, we have Bring Me My Fix. And he said, my wife's doing the basic strength female, as mentioned in the members Q&A. Just wondering how the exercise selection stroke programming differs from the male version and your rationale. So in terms of exercise selection might differ slightly when you're looking at it from the kind of initial view, just the overview of it. But in fact, it's just slightly different forms of the same exercise. So one of the kind of classic examples of this will be pull-ups. Female athletes, generally speaking, particularly female beginner strength athletes, will have far less ability in that kind of pull-up position or chin-up position, or generally speaking, upper body pulling strength. And so in that case, it might look like they're doing a vastly different exercise, but they're really just 2 or 3 rungs further down in the same progression scale. Now, that comes along with the programming of the volume and intensity as well. They're just that bit less inclined to have really good upper body pulling skills or pressing skills. And so those progressions are slightly skewed. But generally speaking, beginner strength training is the same for males and females. They're just getting on the ladder at slightly different times, and the rate at which they'll progress are slightly different. Now, if you look at male versus female weightlifting programming, there's a few more pieces of nuance there. Generally speaking, females will be able to do more frequency. They'll be able to have those higher intensity or relative intensity weights more often. And maybe they won't be able to handle the same volume in their strength work, but that's just some examples.
Lent Ken is asking, do you think rep certification is actually useful for coaches, or is it just a way to get coaches to pay for CPD every couple of years? So one, it definitely is part of the getting you to pay more money, but your big thing with reps is legal wise as a coach, and you'll see it a lot with practitioners like physical therapists, manual therapists, physios, chiropractors, is a certification in regards to a governing body is very, very important. Specifically in Europe, is if you're for insurance, or if someone tries to bring some litigation against you when the investigation is done, they'll be like, okay, look, he was following the global guidelines. There was a case a couple of years ago, very unfortunately, with a chiropractor in the UK, actually, sounds weird to say the word, but killed someone basically, or someone died in practice is probably a fair way of saying that. A man in his 90s was doing some adjustments, was on the final treatment of several treatments, and basically ended up, very unfortunately, severing some nerves to the spinal cord, and obviously the breathing stopped on the table, and the chiropractor initiated first aid, which may or may not have made things worse. When the chiropractor obviously went to court, they found that the chiropractor was not at fault because they were following the very broad guidelines of that chiropractic practice in Europe. So when you're doing things like this, when you're coaching people on person and inside and things like this, it is useful to be qualified in stuff, if only for protecting yourself against litigation. Now, it's very, 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 very rare that you would ever need it. But when you need bear spray and there's a bear attacking you, that's the time you need it. So that's probably, if I had a facility, we were coaching people in a gym all year round, would be really on top of certifications. And then sometimes you'll see if someone's trying to claim with health insurance just for your session, sometimes we'll see health insurances will, have 10 sessions with a PT or 10 sessions with a chiropractor. Oftentimes they won't let you claim those sessions unless you're certified or registered with someone or something related to that. So really, it's legally, it is where it might help you. Now, it's no guarantee against safety, obviously, in a legal concern, but it is prudent. And I don't think they're that much, depending.
No. Most of the time as well, you can get an employer to pay for them, which is really useful. One other aside part to that, so that's the most important thing with your certifications. But generally speaking, then constantly upskilling and constantly going to these kind of certification weekends or workshops or whatever, even if the content of the course doesn't change how you practice coaching or therapy or whatever it is you do, even if the information being delivered there isn't massively valuable to you, and even if you are just ticking the box, it's another time where you're surrounded by the people who do what you do, and also where you're going to have the conversations around that. So it might be where you go to a sprinting and plyometrics UKSCA workshop. You might necessarily learn anything massive about sprinting and plyometrics there if you've been in the game for a while, or maybe you wouldn't agree with everything those coaches say or those tutors say. But you're also in a room for a weekend with 20 other sprinting and plyometric coaches who are learning just like you're learning. And that kind of communal conversation or that mixing of ideas is really, really important. And as coaches, we rarely go out and spend time with other coaches unless you're at competitions or things like that. And even less frequently than that, we rarely have these kind of conversations where you're really getting in depth on one thing. So it might be stage 2 plyometrics training in youths or something like that. Unless you have the structure of a workshop or the structure of a CPD course, it's rare that you're actually going to kind of flesh out those ideas with other people who are coaching. So I do think that continued professional development has a number of kind of auxiliary things that come along with it that are really beneficial. Ian Young says, hey gents, loving Horse 2.0. What do you think about Dan John's 10K kettlebell swings or kettlebell swings as GPP conditioning in general? I'm not sure about Dan John's. Do you know anything about that?
I remember seeing some videos of him doing kettlebell swings every day, but I don't know what the 10K thing was, to be honest.
Now, in terms of kettlebells for general conditioning tools, they're really, really useful. We actually just did a reaction to a wrestler's training a
Kyrgyzstan Axel
so
Markmadov.
Like wrestlers, combat sports athletes, generally speaking, really like kettlebells. They use them a lot. They have a very good application in terms of conditioning, general work capacity, and stuff like that. They're probably not the best option for maximal power or maximal strength work, but very few people use them in that capacity anyway. So I really like kettlebells. I really like kettlebells when an athlete is training in the gym. They're doing their strength and power work in the gym, but they might need to do some extra work capacity stuff at home. Kettlebells are a really, really good tool to do that. And as well, they're quite easy to scale. Rather than scaling it with intensity like we would a barbell, you're instead going to scale it with exercise, the exercise selection you're doing, the volume, how intense you're going in terms of rest periods, how many reps you're doing in a row. So they are really valuable. You just don't have that immediate scale of intensity like you do with a barbell.
Shogun said, hey, I'm also trying to work on my thoracic mobility extension in the start position. What kind of work are you doing for your back extensions? So primarily soft tissue work with a soft tissue ball, a little bit of foam roller, but I find that when it comes to the back, the foam roller is a little bit too large, covers too much of a surface area, whereas the very rigid slitter or lacrosse ball or soft tissue balls are much more specific and you get to a specific area. So mostly I am pretty much daily lying on top of the ball and then just moving the arm straight through this kind of range of motion and palms up. Then I'm doing lots of intercostals or ribs along here, so in between the kind of valley of the ribs, and going laterally along those and then down along the erectors with the soft tissue and moving from extension to flexion. And that's kind of one of my ways I'm attacking at the moment, see if it helps. And there's other things we could do for thoracic, but if the extension, you need to make sure that all of that is a little bit clearer. And so that's one of my ways I'm enjoying currently to do that.
Moniel says, how do I figure out what accessories to prioritize the most? Switching back to weightlifting from a long bodybuilding phase and struggling to fizzle lots of accessories. They all feel valuable. So the first thing with accessories is just having a bit of an honest kind of look at what you need and why you need it. A lot of the time we'll write our programming, we'll do snatch and clean and jerk, we'll do squats and pulls, and then we basically fill in the accessory work because we know we should be doing accessories. We rarely take the time to think about it with the same level of detail as you might think about derivatives of the snatch or clean and jerk or complexes you're going to use. So that's the first thing. What do you need? Do you need more upper back strength? Do you need more midline stability? Do you need more specific quad strength? Whatever it is it range of motion and mobility work? Once you figure that out, then you can need to have a chat with yourself about how much can you actually give up. So everything that's not squatting and clean and jerking, everything that's not snatching and clean and jerking is taking away from the snatch and clean and jerk. So we understand intuitively that I'm going to take some of that training capital away from snatch and clean and jerk because I need to back squat, or I'm going to take some of it away because I need to do my pulls. Every weightlifter understands that. We rarely even quantify that. We might have a conversation where, okay, we'll put a bit more into squats now and do a bit less heavy clean and jerks for a few weeks just to give your squat a chance to build up a small bit. But when we're doing accessories are the exact same thing. Every time you're doing an accessory, every movement, every minute of accessory exercise is not snatching, it's not clean and jerking, it's not squatting, and it's not pulling. So you really need to figure out how much of that other training capital can you take. The last thing then is just making intelligent decisions about the accessories you choose and why you choose them. mostly when we look at weightlifters who are programming for themselves, they pick the most kind of flashy accessories to do. They pick the things they see other weightlifters or pro weightlifters doing on Instagram, and they do that because they think that's going to be the best bang for their buck. Generally speaking, you want to pick the lowest hanging fruit for your accessories, the highest return in terms of stimulus to fatigue, and make sure it's not going to be incredibly kind of cognitively or mentally taxing when you're doing it, because it'll always be at the end of a session, and usually you'll be quite fatigued by the time you get around to it.
Eugene's asking, from a spectator perspective, what do you think hypothetically switching the snatch and clean and jerk order would do? I think we'd probably see slightly bigger clean and jerks, but possibly not, because even though you might be a bit fresher, you're going to be super conscious of the snatch following your clean and jerk, and you're going to probably not clean and jerk quite as heavy to ensure you hit decent snatches. So I'd say we're probably going to see a regression in weights. But I think the sport of weightlifting as it is pretty entertaining. It's pretty fast. It's pretty clear weight on the barbell, 2 lifts. People's big thing with the press out rule is that it's just kind of unclear to non-spectators. But I think if we got on top of that, I think the sport is as entertaining as the sport of weightlifting can be without changing it to a different sport. Like if you look at CrossFit at its peak was certainly more popular than weightlifting, and very, very long drawn out competitions, pretty boring competitions, even for people who like the sport. They wouldn't watch all the heats, they just skip to the end or see who's winning, watch some of them, and then they move to that kind of grid format where you went just further along that line so you could see where someone is progressing. So trying to make it a bit more spectator friendly. But I think weightlifting as it is a good sport. It's just obviously the environment and politics around it. Portugal went great, so a lot of good athletes came over and made some big lifts and learned a lot, hopefully.
Lucas Dimavio. Oh, and we had some of the Ascension crew back as well, trying out the S&C camp this time. So Lucas Dimavio says, Sika jumping stroke sprinting program, ? Trying to mix weightlifting and plyos, but don't want to overdo it. My main sport is parkour, tricking, and trampolining. So this is a really interesting thing, right? Because in the last 6 months, we've seen a lot of weightlifters want to do more plyos, and in almost every case, it's not great. In almost every case, it's not really going to benefit their weightlifting. Now, absolutely, there's a case to be made that if you just want to do it, you should do it. But in your case, your sprinting and plyometric work is going to be so, so valuable. So sprinting and plyos, if you're doing parkour, trampolining, I can't remember what the third one was. Sprinting and plyos are basically the basis of your sport-specific training. So obviously you need to be getting stronger. Obviously you need to be gaining work capacity. But the big aspect of your sport is jumping, landing, bounding, manipulating your body in the air. And so in that case, your sprinting and plyo program should be taking precedence. You should be looking at this as the backbone of your programming. And then you add in your 1, 2, or 3 days a week of strength training on top of that. Now, if the weightlifting movements are good for you, if you have good technique with them, or you have access to coaching, great. Weightlifting movements are really good, really high power outputs, able to move good heavy weights nice and fast, great. Is that the case for every parkour athlete? Definitely not. A lot of parkour athletes will get much more out of doing a very good sprinting and plyometrics program, then combining that with a fundamental strength training program. Maybe the addition of something like a power clean, or maybe the addition of something like a heavy kettlebell swing, nice heavy weights moving fast. Absolutely great. But is it the fact that every parkour athlete needs to snatch and clean and jerk? Absolutely not.
What makes the weights nice? Like where they take you out for dinner and stuff?
What makes the weight nice for me is, when you catch a power clean and it kind of vibrates a little bit.
Oh, that's pretty kinky. So
that's what I look for.
Tony always saying, what's your view on starting hip height in the deadlift, seeing tips ranging from clean height to close to your RDL? And what is the actual difference between deadlift and clean deadlift? So in terms of conventional deadlift hip height, what we're looking for is foot stance, under hip width, no wider than shoulder width, usually somewhere in between or closer to that hip width stance, depending on the width of your hips, the size of your legs, the size of the wagon you are dragging. Then we're looking for your shoulders to be on top of the barbell, not in front of the barbell. Definitely not behind the barbell. So if we're obeying that foot stance and shoulders on top, generally what we'll see is someone above parallel with the hamstring. So if we're lifting the hamstring to the ground, it'll almost always be above parallel. And then depending on your anatomy and your limb lengths and your levers, you'll see somewhere from 45 degrees below that or a little bit higher than that. But generally, we're very close to parallel, but always above it, and then somewhere up until about 45 degrees. So, for example, if you were to look at my hamstring angle versus Dara's, if we both obeyed those foot position and shoulder position, Dara's will be probably around that 45-degree angle. Um, and then mine will be closer to that parallel. So it kind of depends on your limb lengths. But if we obey the two of those, generally you'll end up in a good position. Now, the difference between a clean deadlift and a conventional deadlift for strength, is usually we'll see in a clean deadlift, or what we should see is the shoulders actually move slightly forward in front of the barbell. The back angle changes slightly. So we'll see a little bit of a decline in the torso angle, and the knees will shift back pretty soon. As soon as the barbell's leaving the floor, we'll see those shins reverting to perpendicular with the floor as the shoulders move in front of the barbell. And we'll see this kind of S curve J pat or S curve pat for the first and second pull. Where for the deadlift, generally what we'll see is we'll try and keep those shoulders moving pretty vertical above the barbell, at least until the knee. And we'll see those knees staying forward, keeping that shin angle inclined. So it's kind of more of a squat, and the pull is a little bit more of a hingy poodles,
Hingy pops.
a hingy doos.
Nicholas Carras says good day. Marta says thanks, explained very well.
That was
Max
I probably explained it well. It probably wasn't you.
Was it actually you answered this
I have
question?
no idea. I'm just assuming.
Max G's says, I still hear Gerf saying more traps in my head every time I set up for any pull now. That's great.
That's great.
You want to hear Gerf's voice in your head at every moment of the day. Gia says, hello guys, is there a connection between feeling lethargic and bulking? So no, yes and no. Is there a connection there? There's probably multiple reasons when you're bulking that you might feel lethargic. The first reason is you're just getting heavier, and being heavier, particularly in those initial few months of that weight gain, will feel worse. It feels worse doing everything you're about to do. Feeling heavier is just more difficult to move your body around, to breathe, to sleep well, and all that. Now, what else could be going on when you're bulking? Well, one of the main things is due to that increase in calories you're taking in every day, you're probably putting more energy into your digestive system. So this is the very same system that works as we start vomiting when you're doing a lot of conditioning work. Your body is not able to put the blood flow or the energy it needs into your digestive system, and so it flushes it out from both ends. When we're bulking, you're taking on more calories, eating more food. Your body has to put more energy into digesting that food, and so you might feel tired. Now, the last thing I would say is that it's likely you're taking on a lot of carbs here as well. And it might just be you're getting a large insulin spike following the intake of those carbohydrates, which then causes you to feel more lethargic. Now, a nice little adjunct to that is if you start timing those carbohydrates a small bit better, you mightn't feel that same spike in insulin. So taking those carbohydrates around training or just before sleep might actually be a useful way of curbing some of that lethargy that will come along with the increase in calories. Aubrey Emmett says, is rate of muscle gain more dependent on training age or distance from peak potential fat-free mass?
So when it comes to hypertrophy training, and it's a thing we're always kind of almost chuckling at in the office, is obviously we'll see the arguments going on with that Mike Menser thing versus kind of almost Mike Israel, and then we'll see the things like with Jeff Nippard and the stretch mediated or the elongated stretch mediated hypertrophy and stuff like that. And the thing with hypertrophy, from we're looking at from our point of view, because we're never really hardly ever trying to solely maximize hypertrophy training. And the thing that's never really discussed in those conversations is that once you're doing anything that resembles hypertrophy training, you're getting most of the potential hypertrophy you'll get from hypertrophy training. So they'll talk about, man, I only do sets of 8. And they're like, no, I was doing sets of 12 and I blew up over 3 months, And then if you look at the studies, and it's important to remember in terms of like statistical significance in sport and exercise journals that the p-values, like all, are just made up largely, and what's decided to be statistically significant, while some analysis is done and based off of good reasoning and previous studies and cohort size, ultimately it's still just kind of selected within reason for what that statistician and researchers decide is statistically significant. But they'll get statistically significant values, and it'll be like group 2 had 1.12% more lean mass after 8 years, and it's like, yeah, that's whoa.
Nice.
So what I'm getting at here is that um really the answer is distance from peak fat free mass. Like, so training age, you could be coasting along and you could be doing hardly any hypertrophy training. But if you're just a genetic hyperresponder, you're just really talented at strength sports and building muscle, you will just, once you're doing any kind of reasonable progression on the hypertrophy work, you know, again, we're being reasonable here. We're not saying you're doing Pilates and someone else is doing sets of 10. We're talking about two people come into the gym, you're doing no sets to failure, and that other person is doing sets to failure every week, and they're doing the most elongated stretch mediated hypertrophy that they can manage. Realistically, that person who's just a good responder is going to get there pretty quickly. And if you look at general population, the freaks are the freaks as soon as they kind of start training, especially in terms of hypertrophy training. So once we get into the ballpark of we're doing something that resembles resistance training for hypertrophy, you'll see that people who are going to progress pretty quickly along to their fat free mass index, they're their biggest potential naturally, they'll get there pretty quickly. So training age could be a factor. It could be a case that you just haven't flipped that switch for 5 years. And to be honest, a lot of that is on top of that as well is nutrition. So how the person's eating will have a big impact on that. But if we're doing anything that resembles the correct principles, the person who is destined to get there pretty quickly, their distance from there, from when they were had no stimulus for increasing their lean tissue to when they're doing everything, they're going to get there pretty quickly. So the training age there's a caveat for training age where someone could be eating like shit, hardly any protein, not really pushing the resistance training. But more often than not, if you're in the hypertrophy space, people just kind of push towards what they're going to hit by and large. Now, strength training and sports are very, very different than that. And obviously you can maximize all of your attributes for hypertrophy training. But this is what I was talking about in that guy from the 1912. You know, he was absolutely shredded. He was at that kind of one of the some games in France in like in 1912, and we're talking about this before gear, and loads of people are like, anyone could look like that. And our experience from seeing lots of athletes is that not many athletes look like that. And talking about athletes, elite athletes who've taken PEDs don't look like that. And I don't know if you remember, but it was the post of this dude in 1912 with a mustache, and he was absolutely yacked, absolutely shredded. And it's generally it's a case of if you're training and you're going to have a lot of fat-free mass, you'll get most of it. As far as a statistician is concerned, if they were to look at it purely on numbers on a page, you would have most of your fat-free mass pretty soon if you're doing something that resembles strength training for sure. And it's not you're not going to see hypertrophy or lean mass blow up from a massive change in training.
Hypertrophy is the most simple area of sports science.
Yeah.
Lifter 101 says most optimal way to peak for a competition 1 or 2 weeks before. So I assume you're weightlifting and it's a weightlifting competition. For most people, weightlifting competition peaks are 7 days. In some cases, people prefer 5 days, but for us and all the weightlifters we've seen, mostly 7 days works quite well. The best thing you can do is send us an email, sikastrength@gmail.com, send us your 1RMs. We'll send you the peaking week and you can take a look at it. What's it generally look like? Well, you're probably going to train around 3 times prior to the competition, so you'll have a bit more rest than a standard training week. The big thing you need to have in your head is do not mess it up now. More people mess up their peaks than hit their peaks perfectly. particularly in their first kind of 10 competitions. Most people go too heavy the week before. Most people get really neurotic and worried about the competition, and they keep going in, trying to hit certain things in the snatch and clean and jerk. So if you're going to compete on a Saturday, go to the gym on a Sunday, hit your opening snatch, your opening clean and jerk, and hit roughly your max clean and jerk number for around a double in the front squat. Then on Monday or Tuesday, go to the gym, do some light derivatives of the snatch or clean and jerk. Those derivatives should depend on what you need to be doing in training. Those weights should never drift massively above 60 or 65% of 1RM for both snatch and clean and jerk. Then on Wednesday or Thursday, you should be going to the gym, nice, snappy, fast lifts, maybe 5 sets of power snatches at 50%. Maybe go on to some power clean plus jerk, then around 50 to 60% again. 2 or 3 sets of that is absolutely loads. You take the next day before the competition off, and then you go to the competition, you do the same warm-up you do every single time, you eat the same food, take the same pre-workouts or stimulants you do every single time, and it is a very, very simple competition to peak for. It's the same every single competition. You'll do the same thing every time. So that's roughly what a peak for weightlifting competition should look like.
Do you ever shower before jiu-jitsu?
Beforehand,
Yeah.
if I'm super sweaty, I do.
Yeah.
If I've like trained or ran in the morning, I'll hop into the shower
before. Yeah, it's only right. Lucas said about girth, your box jump is absolutely massive. Thank you very much, Lucas. You've got to try doing a backflip one of these days. If you wanted to, you could send a backflip full on hard ground. Genetic potential for days. So I tried learning backflip years ago with Clarence, and we spent 10 minutes looking at it, and then that was it. Never revisited it, and that was probably that's probably 10 years ago now, maybe 8 or 9 years ago.
You definitely have a backflip in the tank.
But Clarence reckons if you could clean body weight, you probably have enough power for a backflip.
Really?
Which maybe is Clarence just underestimating people or overestimating people.
Can you clean 130 kilos?
Once upon a time, I could.
It'll be great to see you doing a backflip. Max Offerman says, when I fail heavy squats, it's always out of the hole. I just get stuck at the bottom. Is that more likely a technical or a strength issue? So why are you getting stuck in the bottom? Well, this is probably a length tension relationship thing with your quads, your glutes, your hamstrings, and your back. So you're in a highly flexed position. Those muscles have been lengthened as much as they possibly can. You're probably not utilizing the proper timing in the squat, which means you don't have that extra bit of power coming from a stress shortening cycle or reflex. And then because of that, those muscles are in a super lengthened position, and it's incredibly hard for you to put the necessary amount of force through it. So a way of visualizing this, if I have my arm straight out here and Owen puts 20 kilos onto my hand, if I was to curl that 20 kilos up just from this position here, it's a hell of a lot harder than if I was in this already shortened position. My muscles just going to be able to produce more force more easily. Now, if you're always failing out of the bottom position, there's also probably a technical aspect going on here. And the most common technical error we see in the bottom position of people's squats is they lose tension. So as they sit down to the bottom, might be all nice and controlled. They might get to just below parallel. Then they'll kind of just go like wet paper. They'll drop, they'll go loose, and then they'll try and generate that force on the way up again. This is one of the major areas we see that kind of technical flaw of just getting pinned in the bottom of the squat. So if you're noticing that, if you're sitting down nice and controlled, and then you try and bounce out of the bottom position, it's very likely that's what's going on.
Tonio is saying, have a rather narrow squat stance and join the lifting club. And first thing I've been told was to stand with wider, which felt uncomfortable. How do you find the perfect squat stance? So in general, first of all, it's important not to put too much stake in how something feels when you make a change. So the big thing is that usually, or very often, is that when we make a change, it feels bad because it's different, not so much because it's objectively better. Sometimes we make changes and they do feel better, which is great, but we kind of just have to look at it objectively. And we're looking at your bottom position. We're looking at your hips in relation to your heels. We're looking at your torso angle. We're looking at your upper back position, and you maintain that upper back position. We're looking at your shin angle, and is it staying driving throughout the full squat? So in general, some people do squat too narrow, and that wider stance is better because you want more room sitting between your hips. Because if we're sitting really narrow, we're not getting a lot of opportunity to get our hips in between our heels. As a result of that, then even though it feels super strong, it feels really stacked. We're getting a lot of biomechanical stacking, so everything's on top of each other. We're getting the heels and the knees and the hamstrings and the calves. Everything's on top of it, and it feels super controlled. There's a lot of kinesthetic awareness and a lot of good feedback going along. But the problem here is that you're slightly more inclined unless you've got insane ankle mobility, and even then you just have some mass that's in the way. So if we go wider, if we're too narrow, we end up with an opportunity to sit in between our hips, or sit in between our heels, or hips in between our heels. So we end up with this better torso angle for the squat. And so initially it mightn't feel great, but in the long run, it's probably a better style of squat. So it's important just to not be too concerned with how something feels when you're making a change. If someone recommends a change and you trust them and they're a good coach, then it's probably a good idea to believe in what they're saying until proven otherwise. The change often feels bad, not because it is bad, but rather because it's different. And when we're used to high intensity movements, high force movements, stressful movements, the change from what we're doing to new change can often feel bad. And even though it's unjustifiably bad, or unjustifiably not bad.
Chad O'Connor says, what would you recommend for cardio and increasing VO2 max from an S&C viewpoint? So
what's that EPO machine you use all the time? What is that?
That's not a machine.
Oh, what's all the program on your desk about EPO? What's that?
That's
machine?
a different thing.
Oh, okay. Is it like the skiing erg? ERG, EPO. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the big thing with this, I assume you're saying from an S&C standpoint, is that you're going to be doing a VO2 max test. VO2 max tests are quite grueling. They can be quite difficult, but they give you a really good idea of where the athlete sits in terms of their aerobic capacity. So what does a VO2 max test look like? Usually it's kind of stepwise increase over the course of maybe 20 minutes if you're phenomenally good on that.
20 minutes?
Yeah. So you go on the bike and they'll just gradually increase the loading that's on the bike. They basically keep pushing you until your wattages drop down, and then they'll get an estimate of VO2 max from that. Now, there's a couple of things that come along with this. Firstly, make sure that's the test you're doing. The second thing is actually do a VO2 max test. So you don't necessarily have to be fully strapped into all the paraphernalia. You don't have to be in an A&K lab or a biomechanics lab or anything like that. You just have to be on a watt bike, and you have to be roughly following what the test protocols will be. So this will give you an idea for when the pain comes. This will give you an idea for where your weaknesses lie. And also it'll give you an idea of what the test itself is going to feel like. So test, retest on VO2 max there's a lot of kind of training that comes into it. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it without necessarily having a better VO2 max. It's just unfortunately the way the test is. Now, if you're on a watt bike and your outputs, your power outputs are very, very low, you're not going to get a really good VO2 max purely for the fact that as they keep increasing that resistance on the bike, you're just going to have fade off in wattage coming along with that. So the big thing, get on a bike, test out, like actually do the test, see how it feels for you. The second thing then, do plenty of aerobic work. So a lot of zone 2 is going to be really useful, but as well, a lot of that higher heart rate stuff is going to be really, really useful just to push that top end. So I'm probably looking at around 4 sessions a week on the bike, 2 of those being longer and slower, 2 of those being higher with the intensity, but you're really going to look at specifically doing bike cardio work if you're being tested on a bike. And realistically, if you're doing a VO2 max test, you will be tested on a bike rather than being tested on anything else. And then the other thing that comes along with VO2 max is just generally speaking, having better cardio is better. So if you're doing 4 sessions a week on the bike, 2 longer, 2 shorter, and more high intensity stuff, more cardio on top of that will be really beneficial. Whether that's running, whether that's a ski erg or a row erg, any of that is going to be beneficial. Just make sure it's not wearing you down too much.
You'd be surprised on how not great some elite athletes' VO2 max would be in sports where you think it might be pretty good. An extreme example of that would be, for example, if you were to look at elite jiu-jitsu athletes, wouldn't be a whole lot better than general population. That would definitely be better, but it's not something that would be massively. But if you looked at, I think it's cross-country skiing, biathlon, I think is the highest VO2 max of sports. So it's an interesting one. So a great one is just the assault bike or some variation of that, where you're just going to town on the bike is quite useful. Hi lads, finishing school and heading to uni soon. Very exciting. Wondering if you found it more difficult to train while on your course. No, no, you'll have loads of free time in uni.
University is the best time for training.
You'll think in university, and not to be derogatory now, but you'll be like, man, I'm so busy. But you're not. You've so much free time. You'll be like, they want me to read for an hour every day. Every hour lecture, you have to read for an hour. I'm never going to get that done. So, Matt, you'll have loads of time. Look, unless you're doing medicine and you're working a job at the same time, you'll have loads of time to go training. You might have 1 or 2 weeks when you have to study where you'll have less time than usual, but assuming your course is about 4 years long, the next 4 years of training should be the best 4 years training time wise of your life so far. So have no fear, you will be fine.
During my undergrad, I opened and ran a strength and conditioning gym from second year onwards, and the strength and conditioning gym was 2 3/4 hours away from where the university was. You will have loads of time.
Enjoy.
Yeah. Ian Young says sounds like he's been using kettlebells right the whole time. That's great to hear. 2A3S4D plays says, hi guys, whenever I train upper body, I tend to get DOMs to a point where I can't train upper body properly again for 2 to 3 days. Any recommendations for how to get to my upper body work more effectively? So this is the kind of idea or the concept of maximum recoverable volume. Dr. Mike Israel has some really interesting stuff on this. But generally speaking, if you're crippled for 2 or 3 days with upper body DOMs, you've just pushed it too hard. And there's no way of kind of getting it in more effectively. You need less weight on the bar or less intensity, for want of a better term. You probably need a bit less volume as well. So it's very likely you're just overdoing it on your upper body hypertrophy work. You don't need to go that hard. You should be able to do kind of upper body hypertrophy work 3 times a week if you're really wanting to push that. And so 2 days of crippling or 3 days of crippling DOMs is way, way, way too much. So like we talked about earlier with how to select accessory exercises, I'd really be looking at the lower hanging fruit. If you're going into the gym and murdering yourself on weighted dips and you're fatigued, tired, and sore for 3 days after weighted dips, then obviously you shouldn't be doing weighted dips if you need to get more training sessions in. So obviously in that case, you should be going to tricep kickbacks. You should be going to a machine version of the lift, which will generate or has the possibility to generate less fatigue. You should just be looking for the simpler exercises, getting an appropriate amount of volume in there, and then building up to those weights gradually. But yeah, you definitely shouldn't be crippled for kind of 3 days. The last point I will say on that is if you're doing hypertrophy work, DOMs are just part of it. And you'll kind of just have to put up with DOMs. There'll be a lot of training sessions you'll go to where you are sore, tight, and tired, and that's okay. That's definitely okay in most of the time we're training with weights. You're going to be sore. Obviously, if you're an athlete, you're a thrower, a weightlifter, or whatever, you don't want to be doing your really skill-based sessions when you're very, very fatigued. But generally speaking, if you're trying to do a hypertrophy phase or in the depths of a strength training cycle, you're going to be sore. DOMs are part of it. Now, it shouldn't be struggling to get out of bed DOMs. It shouldn't be kind of life-altering muscle soreness, but a bit of tiredness, a bit of fatigue, a bit of pain in the muscle is just going to be expected.
In a few videos, you mentioned good mornings in certain circumstances where you like good mornings. Could you clarify a bit more, because I'm using them as my main back exercise? So some lifters just seem to prefer them. Some lifters have a very hard time controlling that lower back and that hamstring angle and their upper back and the barbell, have a very hard time coordinating all that. So sometimes you'll see power lifters maybe really inflexible, don't have a lot of room in their hips, hamstrings are quite tight, and they just don't have a great position when they're good morning. But then we might see weightlifters doing good mornings and they'll hit a really nice position that's super valuable. So it is a great back exercise, great posterior chain exercise, and we don't like to load them up super heavy. I don't like obviously the West Side idea of maxing your 1RM good morning, but using them for moderate sets, once a week frequency for medium to high repetitions is a good place. Keep it pretty light, keeping the form perfect. You'll see a lot of weightlifting nations are a big fan of them, especially kind of the closer to the center of the Soviet weightlifting system you'd have got, that kind of periphery on there. Those nations really like good mornings. They also like 45-degree back extensions or gymnastic back extensions. And you'll see the Chinese will heavily favor the gymnastic kind of extensions. And that's not a good option. So if you have a hard time coordinating it, it's probably not going to get a lot of benefit from that. But if you can do them really well, they can be super beneficial.
Anton Lopez says, can I run the RTA and the snatch program together? And if so, what order should the 4 days be in? So you definitely can. That works absolutely perfectly. A lot of people are doing that. You do snatch day 1, squat day 1, snatch day 2, squat day 2, have a day of rest in between most of those. You probably do day 1 and then day 1 of the squat program on kind of consecutive days, and then have a rest day in between the others. So Monday, snatch day 1, Tuesday, squat day 1, rest on Wednesday, Thursday, snatch day 2, rest Friday, Saturday, squat day 2, rest Sunday.
You remember who that is?
Wei Cheng.
Wei Chen. Hi, lads. Jay says, hi, guys. Any exercise you'd recommend to include in a workout plan to prepare for a BJJ comp? So preparing for BJJ comp isn't the place where I'd be looking at including new exercises or very many different exercises for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu camp. My big concern here is lots of high intensity aerobic conditioning or anaerobic conditioning, and looking at doing lots of jiu-jitsu. So in terms of training, I'd be looking at just zoning in hard on your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Maybe if this is your first one, I'd definitely be looking at that. And then I'd be looking at being pretty calm under pressure, trying to maintain composure and nasal breathing during high intensity conditioning. So big favorite for this is get on a assault bike. These are great for this, but you can use a stationary bike if you want. A rower can be there, but you can go ham on an assault bike without losing technique because the constraints are pretty closed in. So you stay pretty consistent with technique. And I would pick 5-minute rounds, do this 3 sets of 5. I want you to just go pretty ham for either for 10 seconds or 10 calories. And then I want you to coast for 10 or 15 seconds and then go again for a total of 5 minutes. And that's what I'd be more concerned about now coming up to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition. Very often we'll get people even 2 weeks out from a Jiu-Jitsu competition to leave off the strength training sessions or just do a little bit, but let it freshen up, focusing on the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu conditioning, hard conditioning sessions. I really like hard conditioning sessions the week of the competition, not the day before, maybe not even 2 days before, but up until kind of for the competitions on Saturday. On the Wednesday, I still like to see some of that really intense competition or conditioning. The aerobic and anaerobic capacities drop pretty quickly. Mitochondrial density drops pretty fast. So we want to keep that pretty high. And if it's your first competition, you just want to feel like you're probably, if it is your first competition, probably gas immediately from the adrenaline. So you want your peak to be pretty high. So I wouldn't be concerned about any strength stuff right now, any new stuff. But in general, if we're just talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in general for strength training, we're looking at squatting and deadlifting are 2 great ones, very useful for Jiu-Jitsu. Upper body strength, rowing, machine rows, seal rows, dumbbell rows, barbell rows, fantastic. Weighted pull-ups, dips are great. Benching can be great. Benching can be very good, actually. Strict press can be okay, but oftentimes we just don't have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes who can do a lot of that. Loads of core work, loads of kind of complex core work is incredibly useful, especially if you're not very well trained. So we can only get so much work done on the amateur untrained or even the elite untrained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes. So we have to start thinking of magic fandangly ways of doing extra training without taxing the same thing. So there's only so many sets of squats we can do. So when we start doing renegade man makers, starfish planks, Copenhagen planks, start weighting those up, trying to push those things a little bit differently. It's like, how can we make this a little bit tougher without having to push them in the same barbell lifts? Because they're going to get super fatigued and they might not be the most well coordinated or skilled with that. So we're kind of looking at it from different, how can we train them without killing them?
Okay, Lucas Dimavio is back. Tricking was the third sport. He said parkour athlete numbers of 197 back squat, 133 clean and jerk. At 85 kilo body weight, don't need to go much further. Yeah, so definitely your numbers are where they need to be in terms of strength training. So undoubtedly, the training you're doing that's not parkour or it's not tricking or it's not trampolining should be sprinting and plyometric based. when you're close to those kind of times of year when you want to be in the best shape possible, then the strength training you should do should just be basically maintaining those numbers. So if you're significantly lighter now, let's say you're 75 kilos, if you have a 200 kilo back squat, you're at 2.5 times body weight, or a bit more with your back squats. Your back squat's definitely where it needs to be. You just want to maintain those numbers, maintain that muscle mass, but you should be doing very structured sprinting and plyometrics.
I can honestly say a 300 kilo back squat really helps my jumping.
Shock, isn't it?
Yeah, it made a big difference.
Skier says, for purely increasing athleticism, would you recommend doing low bar back squat or front squats? I'd recommend doing high bar back
squats.
Don't do either of the other two.
It's a trick question.
Yeah.
No, definitely high bar back squats for sure.
Tom Miller says, if you guys were programming for a high rocks athlete, would you spend 80% of the program in zone 2 and then get more specific a couple of months out from the comp? Is being good at high rocks basically just epic mitochondrial function? So this is fitness athlete training 101. A lot of the time when you look at a high rocks athlete, you're going to look into 3 different silos for their training. The first thing you should look at is whether they have the strength and power base to do the numbers they need to do. So high rocks has gotten so popular lately, yet we see some very, very fundamental flaws in normal people competing in high rocks. First thing is, let's just take the wall balls or the sled push or whatever the carries they're doing, or the lunges as an example. You'd see a lot of people with phenomenal levels of conditioning, really, really good cardio development work done. But they've essentially become 5K runners, and then you see them doing wall balls terribly. You see them falling down behind the sleds. You see them unable to maintain those positions when they're pushing or squatting or pulling. And because of that, the first area they should look at is that fundamental strength to do the movements well. Now, they don't have to be back squatting 300 kilos. They don't even have to be back squatting as much as the competitive level CrossFitters will, because there's less of a strength emphasis in that high rocks competition. But they have to have a fundamental level of strength training. The second thing then is that zone 2 work. A lot of really, really, like what you're calling epic mitochondrial function, a lot of really good, consistent cardio work every single week is so valuable for the high rocks people. And then the third aspect is specific comp prep, or specific prep with the movements they're going to do. Obviously, we have a much more refined or smaller group of exercises they're going to do in high rocks competition. It's much easier to get better at all those. So they should have their strength base, make sure they're hitting the numbers they need to. Luckily, if you're coming from a strength sport, a power sport, or competitive CrossFit, you'll already have all the strength you need. And then you should be looking at, okay, cardio in the domains you're going to be doing at competition. And then on top of that, the specific skills you'll be doing in those cardio pieces. So it is, High Rocks has done a really, really good job of getting a lot of people to compete who might have been training at CrossFit gyms or S&C facilities, and they'll compete in this because the remit of tasks to do is smaller and it's more cardiovascularly based, which is what most people want to be doing more of their training. They want to be sweating more, they want to be breathing harder for longer. And so in that case, High Rocks opens the door for them. But in terms of the training and how we approach the training, it's not all that dissimilar from a competition skew of CrossFit. We just need less strength. We need less of these skills, or there's less of the skills to practice. And then the cardio domain is slightly higher.
Fable3 said, we watched all the weightlifting reactions, get me through my last night shift. I appreciate the content.
Nice.
Thanks, Fable. I hope that's your last night shift ever. Luke said, Sika coached the powerlifter who was a tricker. Yep, Hayden Wiseman. Nicholas said, for mobility, flexibility has been developed via a program as opposed to doing more sport-specific movement to get into rex positions. Is there a need for a dedicated maintenance period? So hopefully the program that you were doing indicated that, but I assume in this case it hasn't. So definitely. So I think the biggest thing people forget, and probably my biggest gripe with critics of doing mobility or soft tissue work, first of all, is that they're usually people who don't do it or don't train super hard. But the second part is that in general, even people who do it, you forget that mobility is essentially a skill like any other. It's like strength, conditioning, any skill-specific work you do. If you don't continue to provide a stimulus for it, your body slowly deteriorates it. Now, obviously, these attributes deteriorate at different rates. Your conditioning deteriorates pretty quickly. Strength deteriorates pretty slowly. And when probably within reason, within decades of your life, will never return to baseline. So certain things deteriorate, and obviously based on certain stimuluses will deteriorate faster. If you have a upper respiratory tract infection, your conditioning will suffer immediately. And if you lose a lot of muscle mass, your strength will deteriorate faster. Mobility is similar. If you suffer an insult or an injury, your mobility will change. If you do specific training with something in a fixed range of motion, you'll reinforce some less than ideal positions. So mobility definitely needs a maintenance period. Like any other skill, the better you get at something, the more you'll keep of it. So mobility is an attribute that decays as all other physical attributes that we possess. So the big thing is making sure you keep it. Now, some people will keep things a lot easier. I'll keep ankle mobility very, very easy, but that still doesn't mean it has been impacted randomly over the years. And it's just something you have to stay on top of. So for sure, Nicholas, it's a big thing is to understand that mobility, when you're trying to keep it, especially specific ranges of motion for specific things you're trying to do in a sport, definitely does decay to greater, larger extents based on obviously training and genetics. So yes, is the answer to your question.
Aubrey is back and he says, if you guys see this, part of the question was also whether someone starting underweight will be able to catch up to someone starting heavier with similar height and potential FFIMI. Yeah, right. So look, in terms of hypertrophy, you're the rate limiting factor. Your genetics, how hard you're going to work, how consistent you'll be with it, how good you'll be with your diet, how intelligent you'll train. If you just keep going with it, you're the limiting factor. I've yet to meet somebody who genetically was like a hard gainer who didn't actually just try hard enough and put on weight. Pretty much everybody I've ever come up against who said, oh, I can't gain weight, I find it really hard to gain weight, has just never actually tried. They don't eat enough food, they don't rest enough, they don't do intelligent enough training, they don't try hard enough, and then because of that, they don't get the results. So if you're, say, training with your buddy and your buddy has more muscle than you and you want to get more muscle than them, you just have to be better at training, you have to be better at eating, be better at resting, then you have to be better at consistently doing that every single day, every single week for years on end until they inevitably give up. Now, it might be that you catch them within 8 months. It might be that you catch them after 8 years, or it might be that they're just better than you and you'll never, ever catch them. But all that being said, it's all in your hands. All you have to do is keep showing up, keep doing your job. Don't worry about genetic fat-free mass index. Don't worry about how good they are or how far along the line they are. All you can do is just control what you're doing, do the best job possible with it, try and stay positive, even if that person takes a load of PEDs and doesn't tell you and is in phenomenal shape, and then it becomes really, really annoying for you to do that. Just keep going. You can keep gaining muscle mass. You can keep getting better every single week, every single month. It's just you're the rate limiting factor. You have to go every single time and keep sticking with it.
Right, we're kind of at the hour mark there. Thank you, everyone. We got to run, so it's just 5 o'clock. Thank you for all your questions. We'll be back doing these regularly again for the next couple of weeks for the summer. As usual, we just had some interruptions the last few weeks. So thank you for all your questions. And we hope you have a lovely evening and have a lovely weekend.